Hello, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is Aftermath of Murder, Survivor Stories, a multi-part video series featuring exclusive interviews with ordinary people who have experienced an extraordinary event, the devastating loss of a loved one through murder. This series goes behind the headlines as survivors share their stories about the loss, grief, trauma, and hope for healing in the aftermath of murder. Joining us today in studio is Sergeant Jennifer Pound, who is the Media Relations Officer for the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, IHIT. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about IHIT. What's your mandate? What's the purpose?
Well, the purpose of IHIT, we were created in 2003. There was a need from the jurisdiction, the detachments of jurisdiction, to have a specialized unit that could specifically investigate homicides.
Why is it important that it's integrated?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons why integration is important. In our case, we know that crime really sees no boundaries. So when you deal with other municipalities and other police departments, the flow of knowledge and information sharing is just more streamlined, and it makes for a smoother, quicker process.
When it comes to the milieu of crime, homicide really does sit in a special spot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does, for a number of reasons. It's a horrific crime, and we can see it just from the families that we deal with, how devastating this crime really is.
You really are on the front lines dealing with the families. Obviously, there's the crime scene. Walk me through a little bit about IHIT's approach to dealing with the families, the survivors of murder.
Well, the number one thing that we look for is notifying the family when we have a victim, whether that's done through the jurisdiction where the crime occurred or it's done through the IHIT unit. Depends really on where we become involved in that investigation. So when we go to notify the family, we will attend the family's home when possible with victim services.
That must be hard.
It's not easy at all, and it really hits home. You know, it's just walking up to the home sometimes, anticipating what the reaction is going to be. It sticks with you for a very long time. I can tell you that in about 95% of cases, we do know who is responsible for the homicide. Maybe 5% of the cases we walk into, we don't have a clear idea of the motive or the reason for the homicide. There's no history or crime background on the victim. So the puzzle that we're trying to piece together really doesn't come together as smoothly as we'd sometimes like. So if we get to a scene and there is a history of crime or there's gang affiliations, sometimes we deliver that message to the family, and in some cases they've mentally prepared themselves. But that can only go so far. When the message is delivered to a family, no matter how much you prepare yourself for it, it's never received well.
You mentioned that 95% of the time you have a pretty good understanding and idea who has committed the murder.
Right.
But the family doesn't always get to learn that, do they?
No, and that's part of the difficulty too of going through these investigations is the family sometimes think that it's become a cold case or that the investigators are not working on it as diligently as maybe they could. But the reality is these are very, very intense, sometimes fast-moving investigations where we have to keep a priority of preserving the evidence that we retrieve. The integrity of the investigation has to remain within IHIT. So while we would like to share some of the details, some of the intimate details sometimes with the family, there's not a lot of times that we're able to do that until they can sit through the court process and hear it through that forum.
Now that must be a sense of frustration for a lot of families.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's why we strive to keep close contact with the family, to assure them that it's not a cold case and to try and really be as upfront with them as we can. You know, sometimes years pass by where there's not a lot of information or evidence trail that the investigators can follow, and we try and let the families know that up front.
You do a lot of press conferences with the media, and there was just the recent one just a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
How do you handle that?
Well, and again, it depends on the investigation really that we are deployed to. There's certain details that can be released, say, on one investigation, but that might be considered holdback on another investigation. And what I mean by holdback are specific details about the evidence that perhaps maybe only the killer would know.
And I imagine that a lot of those details are pretty troublesome.
Well, absolutely, and really they're not details that people, they shouldn't want to know. But there has become maybe a fixation with, you know, the gory details and the intimate details that they want to see matched to movies that are out there. I can't say 100% why that is, but there is an odd need to know with those certain details. And I think what people aren't realizing is the families behind the scenes, the families that have just lost those loved ones, do not wish to share those details, nor do the police wish to share those details. There's a lot of devastation that takes place to the families of victims, and I don't think there's that clear disconnection between the two. And sometimes people need to take a step back and go, maybe I don't need to know those details because somebody is hurting right now.
Now, how does that manifest itself? Do you see that with looky-loos at the crime scene, or?
Well, I think we have in the past, but I think that's also a lesson learned by us, in that when we get deployed to a crime scene, the area that we cordon off is quite large, and that's done for that very reason, to prevent the looky-loos, but also to preserve evidence. We like to keep a broad area because there's not many times that we can go back and get the evidence if we miss it.
What about things like online blog posts and stuff like that? I'd imagine that there's a lot of damage and harm that could happen there from the people that are taking interest in the case.
Absolutely, and it's a very good point. And we're seeing that in many of our investigations where social media is coming into play. It's proving to be beneficial for us in many cases where we can directly reach the public, but also it's proving to, it causes problems sometimes in our investigations, in that sometimes people will point out who they think a suspect is. And the problem with that is it creates a lot of speculation, and the reality with an IHIT file, with a homicide investigation, is that we need to lead our investigations by facts and evidence. We cannot speculate when we go into a scene, and we cannot build the evidence to support our speculation. So we ask that the public do the same and keep their opinions and speculation and really rumor off of the social media sites.
There's a lot of trauma that goes on for the survivors, the families, the friends of the victims. What about the first responders? What about you? What about your team?
The investigators deal with a lot of very dark investigations. And you know, sometimes it's hard not to take that home. You know, you can't help but put yourself in some of their places and think of your own children and your own parents and wonder how you would deal with it yourself. And it's hard not to have empathy for the family, and it makes you work harder. It makes you have really a lot of compassion for the people that are hurting so much. In my dealings with family, the most upsetting thing is there's no explanation for a homicide. It's not somebody that's in a hospital that has an illness. I mean, it's still a tragedy when you deal with the loss of a loved one, but when somebody purposely takes the life of somebody you love away, it's nearly impossible to get over that type of tragedy.
If you or someone you know has experienced a loss through homicide, go to the BC Victims of Homicide website at bcvoh.com to find available resources and information on upcoming support groups. If you're interested in volunteering or to make a donation, visit the BC Bereavement Helpline website. And to reach both by phone, call 604-738-9950 or toll free 1-877-779-2223. This has been Aftermath of Murder Survivor Stories.